The Star Wars galaxy was full of places that would be pretty cool to visit, and places that you would never, ever want to go anywhere near if you could help it. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of cursed wastelands, shadowy tomb worlds, and dark secrets. If you're a long-time viewer here, you know how much we love divulging the dark secrets of the galaxy, and that's exactly what we're going to do here today. Have a seat and grab a drink and maybe try a death stick or two, because we're going to be recounting tales of some of the most dangerous sectors in the entire galaxy.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Starting off, let's return to a place we've recently discussed on this channel, the Endor System. If you watched our recent video on the forest moon of Endor, you're already familiar with the many horrors that lurked on that remote world. There were towering, brutish Goraks that could eat you whole, vicious, destructive Sanyusan marauders, and, of course, there were the Ewoks themselves, who could be pretty vicious when they got in the mood. Plenty of planets were similarly dangerous for travelers, but the reason the forest moon ended up in this video wasn't just the vicious species that called the moon home, but also how easy it was to get stuck there. Endor was a part of the Model sector, which itself was actually a subsector of the Zuma sector. To describe the Model sector in strictly scientific terms, the whole place was a mess. Spaces trying to pass through the Model sector to Bakura and other remote worlds in the western reaches had to reckon with a whole lot of astrographical hazards, which made simply entering the subsector dangerous. Just crossing the sector meant passing close to the Monsieur Nebula, the Din Nebula, or trying to thread the needle between both, as one of the more well-traveled routes did. Those coming close to the Din Nebula would have to cross their fingers while passing the Din Pulsar, which regularly unleashed bursts of electromagnetic radiation and could easily wreck your ship or straight up kill you. Just passing by the nebula could do severe damage to a ship's hyperdrive, stranding spaces. Those passing close to the Endor system had yet another hazard to reckon with, the Endor Gate, a black hole with a long track record of causing malfunctions and ship crashes. All of these hazards made it extremely easy to get stuck on the forest moon, or worse, some barren uninhabited rock somewhere else in the sector. No matter where you were in the Model sector though, if your ship had trouble, you were pretty screwed. The Model sector was on the edge of the unknown regions, and the only reason anyone would ever bother coming near it would be to get to Bakura, which was even more remote. Simply put, not many ships passed through the Model sector, and most spacers who knew about the region avoided it if they could. If you ended up in the Model sector without a functioning ship, you couldn't count on anyone stopping by to help, even if you put out a distress signal. Unless you made friends with the local Ewoks, you would be on your own. The Model sector wasn't the only part of the galaxy fraught with navigational hazards, however. There's a reason the deep core wasn't explored very well. It too was insanely difficult to navigate. That's because the deep core had the greatest concentration of stars in the galaxy, around 30 billion of the galaxy's oldest, all clustered around galactic center, a supermassive black hole shrouded by clusters of antimatter. This was a place where stars were so close together that they would literally rip each other's cores out. The deep core was the galaxy's burning heart, a frightening display of the universe's fury, unconcerned with things as insignificant as passing mortals. In the deep core, hyperspace travel was tricky at best and impossible at worst. The region had so much interference and stars so densely packed together that only its outer edges were explorable. There were known colonies and hyperspace routes deeper in, however. Tython, the ancient Jedi homeworld, was one such world, as was Prakith, an ancient stronghold of the Sith. During the time of the Empire, Imperial forces secretly forced open a hyperspace route from Prakith, leading even deeper into the core and ending at Biss, the Emperor's secret throne world. Getting to any of these worlds was dangerous, but even worse was the fate that might await you if you got stuck on these worlds. Hyperspace routes in the deep core were unstable due to constant stellar movement, meaning that if you got stuck on Biss or some other deep core world, there was a frightening chance the route you arrived on could be completely wiped away by the time you got back into space. If you ended up trapped in the deep core, you might not have just had a hard time getting home. it might have ended up being impossible to get back home. Shifting away from black holes and stellar anomalies, let's talk about the Sith. The original Sith Empire ruled a distant pocket of space surrounded by a nebula called the Stygian Caldera, a nebula that, mercifully, effectively quarantined them from the outside galaxy, at least for a time. In its time, however, it laid claim to over 100 worlds in what would later become known as the S-Trans sector, turning them into bastions of the dark side. The likes of Korriban, Ziost, Dromund Kaas, and Thule were among the greatest strongholds of their old empire. By the time of the Clone Wars, every last one of the Sith worlds was dead, having long ago been cleansed of life. Reliable hyperspace routes had pierced the Stygian Caldera after the Sith Empire's fall, and so long as spaces stayed clear of the Radama Void, they had nothing to worry about when just passing through the sector. But the Sith worlds were still feared by anyone who knew anything about them, and for good reason. These barren graveyards were still soaked in the dark side. The whispers of long-dead Sith could still be heard in the Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban, at the ruins of the Emperor's Palace on Dromund Kaas, and in the frozen halls of Ziost's ancient Sith citadel. Not even pirates and looters dared to pick over the scraps of the old empires, fearing the wrath of long-dead Dark Lords. So far, we've discussed sectors that were tricky to navigate, that were riddled with black holes, and that housed planets soaked in bad karma. It's fitting then that the last sector we're going to discuss has all three. If you couldn't already guess, we're talking about the Kessel sector, specifically the region around Kessel itself. That's right, it's time to talk about the Kessel Run, the Legends version, mind you, though the canon version is actually very similar. The whole Kessel sector was dominated by the Maw Nebulae, a vast, swirling mass of interstellar gases that made hyperspace travel intensely difficult. There was a relatively safe route through the nebulae, a leg of the Pabol Slayeron, but a fair number of the spaces passing through the sector instead had more dangerous routes in mind, with an even more dangerous goal. Near the very heart of the nebulae, in the metaphorical eye of the storm, was a misshapen planet named Kessel, home to some of the most profitable spice mines in the galaxy. In all other aspects, however, Kessel was hell, housing some of the most brutal slave mines in the galaxy. Untold thousands of corpses lay forgotten in the deepest reaches of its mines, victims of neglect or the local energy spiders. Getting to Kessel was tricky, to say the least. The safest way was along the Kessel Trade Corridor, which branched off the Pabol Slayeron at Zerm and took a winding but relatively hazardous path through the nebulae. There was one problem with using the Trade Corridor, however. It was always heavily guarded, especially during the days of the Empire. Smugglers and other less than legitimate traders wouldn't have had an easy time getting spice through the Trade Corridor, so the more daring ones came up with an alternative route, the Kessel Run. From foremost, the Kessel Run wove its way clean through the Maw Nebulae, skirting extremely close to astrographical hazards in a more or less straight shot at Kessel. This alone was exceptionally dangerous, but it was the end of the Kessel Run that really made this route legendary. On approach to Kessel, the run passed through what was known as the Pit, a very narrow gap in the nebulae that required extreme precision to clear. After that, Spacers had to reckon with one of the most dangerous astrographical hazards in the galaxy, the Maw. The Maw was a cluster of about a dozen black holes all packed tightly together. As you can imagine, passing close to the Maw was virtually suicide, and yet that was exactly what the Kessel Run did. The routes that individual Spacers took varied. Most smugglers were careful not to come within 20 parsecs of the Maw, while Han Solo claimed to have come as close as 12 parsecs. No matter how close Spacers got to the Maw, however, to do so at all was to risk a grisly death. On top of all of this, the Maw hid a terrible secret. It was deliberately constructed by the son and daughter, yep, the ones from Mortis in the Clone Wars, to imprison an entity known as Abeloth, or the Mother. Abeloth was terribly powerful, an entity of pure chaos. It was believed that her influence was actually responsible for the endless cycle of destructive wars that the galaxy endured. That she was pretty much the reason that no one in the Star Wars galaxy could have nice things. She was one of the darkest secrets the galaxy had to offer, and she was always trying to get free. So, that's our look at some of the most dangerous places in the galaxy and why you wouldn't want to end up there with your ship. This was by no means a complete list of places like this, so if a part 2 is something that sounds interesting to you, make sure you let us know in the comment section below. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.